Okay, picture this. You're living in the post-war Soviet Union, and the state controls everything. And I mean everything, including the music you're allowed to listen to. But for a secret group of music lovers, rebellion had this really specific, really strange sound.
So I want you to think about this for a second. What does rebellion actually sound like? What's the sound of an entire generation being denied the music they love, when a simple jazz tune is considered dangerous and rock and roll is seen as a threat to the state?
Well, in the Soviet Union, it sounded like this. A crackling, ghostly melody playing on, get this, a repurposed X-ray of some stranger's chest. Yeah, this is the absolutely incredible story of what they called bone music. So let's dive into what these things actually were. I mean, these eerie artifacts were like a ghost in the machine of Soviet censorship, a really clever and, let's be honest, pretty desperate solution for people who were just thirsty for forbidden sounds. The whole practice was known as Ranjin-Zitazat. That's a Russian term that basically means X-ray press. And the records themselves got these awesome nicknames that were both literal and, a little poetic. They were called bone music, or sometimes just the ribs. And that's because they were literally flimsy, super fragile discs cut onto discarded X-rays, the actual medical histories of Soviet citizens. And what's so wild is the sheer variety of music that was considered dangerous. You'd think, okay, it's just Western rock and roll, right? Like Elvis or Chuck Berry. But no, it was so much more than that. We're talking homegrown culture, songs by Russian emigres who the state now called traitors, gritty criminal soul songs that were super popular, and even traditional gypsy folk tunes. Basically, if it wasn't approved by the state, it got pushed underground. So this all begs a really important question, right? Why? Why go through all of this trouble? Why would you risk everything for what was honestly a pretty scratchy, low-quality recording? Well, the answer, it all comes down to just how oppressive the cultural landscape was back then. I mean, the cultural divide was just night and day. On one side, you've got the state-sanctioned soundtrack, all patriotic marches and songs by official people's artists. But on the other side, a whole world of vibrant, exciting music that the government labeled ideologically harmful. The state controlled the entire record industry, so if you wanted to hear some Benny Goodman or maybe a banned Russian singer like Pyotr Lashenko, there was just no legal way to do it. None. And let me be really clear, the stakes here were terrifyingly high. This wasn't some cool underground hobby. It was a serious crime. Under Soviet law, any kind of private trade was banned. So if you got caught selling these records on a street corner, you could be sent to a labor camp, the Gulag, for up to 7 years. This was absolutely not a game. Okay, so if it was that dangerous, how in the world did they even pull it off? This is where the story gets really amazing. It's a tale of incredible do-it-yourself ingenuity, of homemade machines, and just pure, clever resourcefulness. The whole process was truly a labor of love. First, you had to get your hands on stacks of old X-rays from hospitals, which you could do because they had to get rid of the flammable film anyway. Then came the real genius part. The bootleggers built their own recording machines, often by reverse engineering German models brought back from the war. They would cut the grooves right onto the X-ray film, one by one, in real time. And the final touch? They just burn a spindle hole in the middle with a cigarette. It doesn't get more DIY than that. This whole crazy phenomenon really kicked off in Leningrad back in the late 1940s, and it flourished for about a decade. But of course, the state eventually caught on. The practice was officially outlawed in 1958, and a year after that, the biggest bootlegging ring got busted. By the early 60s, a new technology was on the horizon that would ultimately make bone music a thing of the past. But look, this story isn't just about weird technology and government censorship. At its heart, it's about people. It's about a vibrant, rebellious youth counterculture that took these strange, ghostly discs and made them their own. They were known as the Styliagi, which literally means style hunters, and that's exactly what they were. These were young people who were just completely fed up with the drab, gray conformity of Soviet life. So they wore these bright, colorful clothes, narrow pants, long jackets, trying to copy a cool Western style they'd only ever seen in smuggled magazines or movies. And you better believe, bone music was their soundtrack. So who were the masterminds behind all this, the brave people actually making these records? Well, they were figures like Ruslan Boguslavsky and Boris Tagin, members of Leningrad's legendary Golden Dog Gang.
And these guys didn't see themselves as criminals. They called themselves cultural traitors. They were technically brilliant and unbelievably brave. Boguslavsky actually served 3 different prison sentences for his work. They really did risk it all just for the music.
But, like any underground movement born from very specific circumstances, the era of bone music was always going to be short-lived. And what's really ironic is that its end didn't come from the government. It came from the very thing that made it possible in the first place, technology.
See, by the early 1960s, something new hit the scene: reel-to-reel tape recorders. This new form of bootlegging, called magnesitzidats, or tape publishing, was just better in every single way. The sound quality, way clearer. The tapes themselves, much more durable. And copying them, super easy. The crackly, fragile bone record, which you could maybe play 5 or 10 times before it wore out, just couldn't compete. And just like that, the era was over.
There's this quote from a researcher named Stephen Coates that just perfectly captures the magic and meaning of these objects. He called them images of pain and damage inscribed with the sound of forbidden pleasure, fragile photographs of the interiors of Soviet citizens layered with the ghostly music they secretly loved. They are skin-thin slivers of DIY punk protest. I mean, wow. Each one of these discs tells a story, a medical history, and a cultural history, all wrapped up in one beautiful act of defiance. So when you look back at this brief, incredibly strange moment in history, it leaves you with one big question. In our world today, where music is literally everywhere, it's almost impossible to imagine risking years in a labor camp for one single scratchy song. But they did. And it really makes you wonder, how far would you go for the art you love?